The mother-in-law changed my wife's will while I was overseas. The hidden camera caught everything. My mother-in-law hovered over Rebecca's hospital bed, whispering something I couldn't quite hear. I was about to enter the room when Patricia pulled out some papers from her designer handbag. "Just sign here, sweetheart. It's for your own protection," she said, shooting a glance toward the door. I stepped back into the shadows of the hallway, my heart pounding. 2 days later, I boarded a plane to London for a crucial work project. When I returned a week later, everything had changed. The hidden camera I'd installed in our bedroom, originally to monitor Rebecca's health episodes, had captured what would tear our entire family apart. Before we jump into the rest of this wild story, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Michael Anderson, a 34-year-old software engineer from Portland, Oregon. I've spent the last decade building secure systems for companies around the world, coding protections that keep digital assets safe. The irony that I couldn't protect what mattered most in my own home still haunts me. I met Rebecca Walsh 6 years ago at a tech conference in San Francisco. She was there representing her gallery, looking for innovative ways to display digital art. We connected immediately over our shared love of the intersection between technology and creativity. She was brilliant, vibrant, and had a way of seeing beauty in lines of code that even I missed sometimes. When she laughed, her entire face lit up, and I knew before the weekend was over that this wasn't just another conference flirtation. We dated long distance for 8 months, me in Portland, her in Seattle, before she took a curator position at the Portland Modern Art Museum and moved south. A year later, we were married in a small ceremony on the Oregon coast. Her parents, Patricia and Harold Walsh, hosted an extravagant reception afterward that felt more like a networking event for Harold's investment firm than a celebration of our union. That should have been my first clue. Rebecca came from old money, not billionaire wealthy, but comfortable enough that her family had a vacation home on Lake Washington, and Patricia had never worked a day in her life. Harold managed family investments and sat on several corporate boards, building connections that kept the Walsh name in the right social circles. They had expectations for their daughters: marry well, maintain appearances, and above all, keep family assets in the family. Their older daughter, Natalie, had followed the script perfectly. She married Christopher, a surgeon from a similarly affluent family, and they lived 3 blocks from her parents in Seattle. Rebecca had always been the family rebel, studying art instead of business, working for her salary despite her trust fund, and then committing the ultimate sin, marrying a self-made tech guy with no family connections or inherited wealth. "Michael works with computers," Patricia would say at family gatherings, in the same tone one might use to describe collecting garbage. Harold was more direct. "The tech bubble will burst again, son. What's your backup plan?" I tolerated their thinly veiled disdain because Rebecca loved them, and for the first few years we limited our visits to major holidays and the occasional weekend. Things changed dramatically 2 years ago when Rebecca was diagnosed with lupus. Her condition wasn't immediately life-threatening, but it was serious. She experienced extreme fatigue, joint pain, and occasional cognitive issues during flares. The unpredictable nature of her symptoms meant she had to reduce her work hours, and Patricia immediately suggested they move to Seattle to help care for her. Rebecca refused, insisting we could manage ourselves. I adjusted my work schedule to be more flexible, often coding late into the night after spending days helping Rebecca to appointments or covering for her on bad days. We were managing just fine, but Patricia and Harold didn't see it that way. "She needs family," Patricia would insist during her increasingly frequent visits. "You're always working, Michael. How can you properly care for her?" The implied criticism stung because it targeted my deepest fear, that I wasn't doing enough. But Rebecca and I were partners. We faced her illness together, researching treatments, finding the right specialists, and adapting our home to make difficult days easier. "They mean well," Rebecca would say after each painful interaction with her parents. I wasn't so sure. The worse her condition became, the more controlling her parents grew, especially Patricia. 6 months ago, during a particularly severe flare, Rebecca was hospitalized for complications. Patricia arrived within hours, though we hadn't called her yet. She immediately took charge, questioning doctors, rearranging Rebecca's room, and suggesting treatment options as if I weren't standing right there. "Rebecca needs to update her medical directives," she announced on the 3rd day of the hospital stay. "And you both should review your wills. Harold knows an excellent attorney." It wasn't an unreasonable suggestion given Rebecca's health situation, so we agreed. Harold's attorney, James Whitman, arrived the next day with documents already prepared. I found that odd. How could he have drafted personalized legal documents without speaking to us first? When I raised this concern, Patricia dismissed it. "James has handled our family's legal matters for 30 years. He knows what Rebecca needs." Still, I insisted on reading everything carefully before signing. The documents included a healthcare proxy giving Patricia equal authority to make medical decisions for Rebecca, and a revised will that placed Rebecca's personal assets, including her grandmother's art collection worth nearly $2 million, into a family trust controlled by Harold in the event of incapacitation or death. "Absolutely not," I said, handing the papers back to James. "We need our own attorney to review these." Patricia was furious. Why waste money on another lawyer when James is willing to do this as a family courtesy? "Because we need someone representing our interests, not the Walsh family interests," I replied. That night, after Patricia and Harold had gone to their hotel, Rebecca held my hand weakly. "They're scared for me," she whispered. "Mom has always been controlling when she's afraid." "I know," I said, stroking her hair. "But we need to be careful about legal documents. We should talk to Sophia." Sophia Martinez was a college friend who specialized in estate planning. Rebecca nodded, then drifted off to sleep. The next morning, I stepped out to call Sophia and arrange a consultation. When I returned 30 minutes later, I nearly walked in on Patricia and Rebecca with those papers again. I paused in the doorway, listening. "Just sign here, sweetheart. It's for your own protection," Patricia was saying. "You know Michael is a good man, but if something happens to you, do you really want him controlling your grandmother's collection? He doesn't understand its significance to our family." I felt a cold wave of realization wash over me. This wasn't about protecting Rebecca. It was about keeping control of the Walsh family assets. Before I could interrupt, my phone rang loudly, in my pocket. I stepped back as Patricia's head whipped toward the door. "Michael, there you are," she said, with practiced pleasantness when I entered. The papers had vanished into her designer handbag. "Rebecca's feeling much better this morning." Rebecca did seem improved, with more color in her cheeks. She smiled at me, but there was something uncertain in her eyes that I couldn't quite read. 2 days later, Rebecca was released from the hospital. Patricia insisted on staying with us, just until Rebecca is steady on her feet. I couldn't reasonably object without seeming unsupportive, so our guest room became Patricia's command center. She rearranged our kitchen, established a medication schedule, and somehow managed to be everywhere I turned. The same day Patricia moved in, I received an urgent email from our biggest client. They had experienced a security breach and needed me in London immediately to address vulnerabilities in their system. The timing couldn't have been worse. "You can't leave now," Patricia said when I explained the situation. "Rebecca needs you." "Rebecca has you," I replied, hating the words, even as I spoke them. This trip is critical for my career, and it's only for a week. That night, Rebecca and I talked it through. Go to London, she insisted. Mom will help me, and you'll be back before we know it. We need your job and the health insurance it provides. What she didn't say, but we both knew, was that her reduced hours at the museum meant my income was carrying us through her illness. I couldn't afford to lose this client. The morning before my flight, I checked our home security system, a comprehensive setup I had installed when Rebecca's condition worsened. We had cameras covering the entrances and one in our bedroom that we activated when Rebecca was alone, in case she experienced a health emergency and needed help. The system backed up to encrypted cloud storage that only I could access, a professional habit that would prove more valuable than I ever anticipated. I've enabled the bedroom monitoring while I'm gone, I told Rebecca privately. Just in case. You need anything overnight? I can check in even with the time difference. She nodded, squeezing my hand. I'll be fine. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Mom may be overbearing, but she does know how to take care of people. I kissed her goodbye the next morning, trying to ignore the triumphant gleam in Patricia's eyes as she waved from our doorway. My week in London was a blur of code reviews, security patches, and international conference calls. I checked in with Rebecca several times a day, but our conversations felt strained and brief, often with Patricia hovering in the background. On the third night, unable to sleep in my hotel room, I logged into our home security system to check on Rebecca. The bedroom camera showed her sleeping peacefully, which gave me some comfort. Out of habit, I reviewed the archived footage from earlier that day and felt my blood turn to ice. Patricia had entered our bedroom while Rebecca was napping. She was carrying a folder of documents. The camera's microphone picked up her voice clearly as she gently woke my wife. Rebecca, darling, I had James stop by with the revised papers, the ones we discussed at the hospital. Rebecca looked groggy, clearly having just woken from a medicated sleep. Mom, I told you Michael and I are going to talk to Sophia when he gets back. But that's the problem, dear. I've been talking with your doctor, and he's concerned about these memory issues you've been having. If we wait, and you have another serious flare-up. She let the sentence hang ominously. What memory issues? Dr. Patel hasn't mentioned anything like that to me, Rebecca said, attempting to sit up. That's exactly what I mean. You don't remember your conversation last week. He's worried about neurological involvement. Patricia's voice was smooth, convincing. These documents simply ensure that if you become incapacitated, your medical and financial matters are handled according to your wishes. I should wait. For Michael, Rebecca protested, but her voice was weak. Michael is focused on his career right now, not your health. Who flew in immediately when you were hospitalized? Who's been here taking care of you? Family takes care of family, Rebecca. I watched in horror as Patricia continued this manipulation for nearly 30 minutes, subtly undermining Rebecca's trust in me, exploiting her illness-induced vulnerability, and presenting these documents as urgent protection rather than the asset grab they truly were. The footage showed Rebecca finally signing several pages, her hand shaking visibly. There, Patricia said, gathering the papers quickly. Now I'll have James file these tomorrow, and you can rest easy knowing everything is protected. Should I tell Michael? Rebecca asked, and the hesitation in her voice broke my heart. Let's not bother him while he's handling his work crisis, Patricia replied smoothly. You can discuss it when he returns if you want. But these are your assets. Rebecca, your inheritance. You have every right to protect them as you see fit. After Patricia left the room, the camera captured Rebecca crying quietly before falling back into a troubled sleep. I sat in my London hotel room, shaking with rage and fear. I immediately tried calling Rebecca, but there was no answer. I texted, asking her to call me as soon as she could, regardless of the time difference. Then I called Sophia. "I need your help," I said when she answered. "Rebecca's mother may have coerced her into signing new estate documents while she's medicated, and I'm out of the country." Sophia's response was immediate and professional. "Do you have any evidence of this?" "Video and audio recording," I confirmed. "Send it to me. Then call Rebecca's doctor and express your concerns about her being asked to sign legal documents while on medication. I'll try to put a hold on any filings with the county records office, but I need details about this attorney, James." I provided everything I could, then spent a sleepless night waiting for Rebecca to return my calls. When my phone finally rang at 3 a.m. London time, it wasn't Rebecca, but her father, Harold. "Michael, I understand you've been trying to reach Rebecca," he said, his voice carrying its usual authoritative tone. "Yes, I need to speak with my wife," I replied, struggling to keep my voice level. "Rebecca is resting now. Patricia says she had a difficult evening. Something about being upset. After a call with you." "I haven't spoken to Rebecca since yesterday morning," I said through gritted teeth. A pause. "Well, perhaps I'm mistaken. In any case, the doctor has prescribed a mild sedative, and she's sleeping now. I suggest you focus on your work and let us handle things here. She's in good hands." Before I could respond, he continued, "Oh, and Michael, Patricia mentioned some concerns about your home security cameras. Recording people without their knowledge is legally problematic in Oregon, something to consider." The threat was thinly veiled. They knew I had evidence. "I'll be home tomorrow," I said firmly. "My work here is finished." It wasn't, but nothing was more important than getting back to Rebecca. "No need to cut your trip short," Harold replied. "Everything is under control." I ended the call and immediately booked an earlier flight home. Then I forwarded the security footage to 2 more places, my encrypted personal cloud storage and Daniel Collins, my oldest friend who worked in cybersecurity. If anything happened to me or my accounts, the evidence would still exist. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. During my flight, I couldn't stop thinking about Rebecca. Was she okay? Had they increased her medication to keep her compliant? Was she even still at our house? By the time I landed in Portland, I had left a dozen messages for Rebecca and received nothing in return. I took a taxi directly home from the airport, walking through our front door to find Patricia arranging flowers in the living room as if nothing was amiss. "Michael, we weren't expecting you until Saturday," she said, her surprise quickly masked by a practiced smile. "Where's Rebecca?" I demanded, dropping my bags. "Now, there's no need for that tone. She's resting in your bedroom. The new medication makes her quite drowsy." "New medication? Prescribed by whom?" Patricia waved dismissively. "Dr. Mercer, a specialist Harold knows, much more experienced with lupus cases than your Dr. Patel." I brushed past her and rushed to our bedroom. Rebecca was indeed there, lying against the pillows, looking pale and disoriented. She smiled weakly when she saw me. "Michael, you're early?" Her words were slightly slurred. I sat beside her, taking her hand. "What have they given you, Becky?" She gestured vaguely toward a prescription bottle on the nightstand. I picked it up. A strong sedative, prescribed by someone I'd never heard of, from a pharmacy across town, rather than our usual one. "I need to tell you something," Rebecca whispered, glancing nervously toward the door. "I signed some papers for Mom. She said it was important." "I know," I said gently. "I saw it on our security camera." Her eyes widened. The camera was on, but Mom said she turned off that invasive system. Of course, Patricia had tried to disable our security. Fortunately, she didn't have my technical expertise. Rebecca listened to me carefully. "Did you sign papers changing your will, putting your grandmother's art collection in a family trust?" She nodded slowly. "Mom said it was just temporary until I'm better. She said you were too busy with work to manage everything if I got worse." The manipulation was so transparent it made me sick. Before I could respond, Patricia appeared in the doorway. "Michael, Rebecca needs her rest. Perhaps we could talk downstairs." "Actually," I said, not moving from Rebecca's side, "I think we should all talk right here, about the documents Rebecca signed while heavily medicated, about the new doctor and prescriptions no one consulted me about, and about how you tried to disable our home security system." Patricia's face hardened. "I don't know what you're implying, but everything I've done has been for Rebecca's welfare. If you'd been here instead of chasing contracts in London, perhaps these measures wouldn't have been necessary." "Stop it, Mom," Rebecca said, her voice stronger than I expected. "You promised those papers were just precautionary. You said we'd discuss everything with Michael when he got back. And we will, darling. But you're not thinking clearly right now. The medication you arranged?" I interrupted. "From a doctor we've never met, who prescribed sedatives to a woman with a complex autoimmune condition without consulting her primary physician." Patricia's face flushed. "Harold thought it best." "Of course he did," I cut in. "Just like he thought it best to have his attorney draft documents transferring Rebecca's assets to a family trust while I was out of the country." Rebecca turned to her mother, confusion clear on her face. "What is he talking about? You said the papers were just updating my medical directives." The look Patricia gave me then was pure venom. "Michael clearly misunderstood. Perhaps if he'd been more involved in your care instead of jetting off." "I saw the footage, Patricia," I said flatly. "I heard every word you said to Rebecca, about her memory issues that no doctor has diagnosed, about how family takes care of family while undermining her trust in her husband." Rebecca's expression changed from confusion to dawning horror. "Mom, what did you make me sign?" Patricia stepped fully into the room now, her composure cracking. "Nothing that wasn't in your best interest. Your grandmother's collection belongs in the family trust, not left to someone who can't possibly understand its significance. That someone is my husband," Rebecca said, her voice gaining strength with each word, "and those pieces were left specifically to me, not to the Walsh family." "You're not thinking clearly," Patricia insisted. "This illness has affected your judgment. Harold and I are simply protecting what rightfully belongs to the family." "I want to see the papers," Rebecca demanded, "right now." "They've already been filed," Patricia said dismissively. "James took care of everything yesterday." I pulled out my phone. "Interesting, because I spoke with Sophia Martinez, our attorney, this morning. She put a hold on any filings related to Rebecca Anderson or Rebecca Walsh, pending investigation of coercion and signing under undue influence or medication." Patricia's face went pale. "You can't do that." "I already have," I replied, "along with contacting Dr. Patel about these unauthorized medication changes. He's quite concerned, especially since lupus patients can have dangerous reactions to certain sedatives." The bedroom door opened wider as Harold entered, his imposing frame filling the doorway. "What's going on here? Patricia, I thought Rebecca was resting." "Your wife was just explaining why she tricked your daughter into signing away her inheritance while I was overseas," I said, standing to face him. Harold's expression didn't change, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. "I think you're overreacting. Michael, these were routine updates to Rebecca's estate planning, given her medical condition." "Then you won't mind if our attorney reviews them," I countered, "or if we discuss the ethics of having Rebecca sign legal documents while sedated." "No one was sedated," Harold stated firmly. "Rebecca was perfectly lucid." "We have it on video," I said quietly. "Every word, every manipulation, every lie about her condition and my intentions." Harold's confidence faltered visibly. He turned to Patricia. "You said the security system was disabled. "It was supposed to be," she hissed back. Rebecca struggled to sit up straighter. "I want both of you to leave, now." "Darling, you're not thinking clearly," Patricia began. "Get out," Rebecca shouted, then winced at the effort. "Get out of our house. We'll discuss this with lawyers present. Not here, not now." Harold assessed the situation with the calculation of a businessman cutting losses. "Patricia, let's go. We'll continue this discussion when everyone is calmer." He turned to me. "This isn't over, Michael." "Actually, it is," I replied evenly, "but I'm happy to share our security footage with anyone who needs to see it. The county, the medical board, or the police if necessary." After they left, Rebecca collapsed against me, sobbing. "I trusted her. She's my mother. How could she do this?" I held her, stroking her hair. She thought she was protecting family assets. In her mind, that might even justify the deception. Rebecca looked up at me, her eyes red but clear. "I need to know exactly what I signed. We'll figure it out," I promised. "Sophia is already working on it. But first, we need to get you to Dr. Patel and make sure whatever they've been giving you hasn't caused any damage." The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings, medical appointments, and difficult conversations. The documents Rebecca had signed were indeed extensive, not just changes to her will, but powers of attorney, healthcare directives, and trust arrangements that would have effectively given Patricia and Harold control over Rebecca's medical decisions and her entire inheritance. If she were deemed incapacitated, a determination that conveniently could be made by doctors of their choosing. Sophia helped us file for emergency revocation of all documents, citing coercion and impairment. The security footage proved invaluable, showing clearly that Rebecca was sedated and that Patricia had misrepresented what she was signing. Harold attempted to smooth things over with financial offers, paying our legal fees, offering to restructure the agreements to give me some input. It was never about the money for me, but his offers confirmed what I already knew. This was a calculated move to maintain control of Walsh family assets, with no regard for Rebecca's wishes or our marriage. Patricia took a different approach, telling family members I was isolating Rebecca, that I had brainwashed her against her family. She even showed up at the hospital during one of Rebecca's appointments, creating such a scene that security had to escort her out. The most painful revelation came when we discovered this wasn't the first time they had interfered in Rebecca's life. Through conversations with her college friends and even a former fiancé, we learned of years of manipulation. Scholarships mysteriously revoked when she chose the wrong school, relationships sabotaged when her partners didn't meet Walsh standards, job opportunities that disappeared when they would take her too far from Seattle. Rebecca's health improved once we removed the unnecessary medications Patricia had arranged. As her strength returned, so did her determination to establish clear boundaries with her parents. 3 months after that terrible night, we sat in Sophia's office, finalizing new legal documents that explicitly excluded Patricia and Harold from any medical or financial decisions. Rebecca also wrote a clear, detailed will that left her art collection to the Portland Modern Art Museum, with provisions for certain pieces to stay in our family. Our family, not the Walshes. "Are you sure about this?" I asked her. "They're still your parents." Rebecca took my hand. "Yes, I love them, and maybe someday we can rebuild some kind of relationship, but I can't let them control my life or our future together." As we left the attorney's office, Rebecca leaned against me in the elevator. "You know what's ironic? If they had just respected my choices, including my choice of husband, they would still be part of our lives. And when we have children, they would have been loving grandparents." "When?" I asked, hearing the specific word she had used. She smiled up at me. "Dr. Patel says my condition is stable enough. If we want to try for a family, now might be a good time." I wrapped my arms around her, overwhelmed with love and gratitude that despite everything, we had a future to plan together. We did eventually allow Harold and Patricia back into our lives, but on strictly limited terms. Supervised visits, no overnight stays, no private conversations with Rebecca about her health or our finances. Harold seemed to accept the new reality, even showing occasional glimpses of genuine remorse. Patricia struggled more, constantly testing boundaries until Rebecca made it clear: respect our marriage and our autonomy, or don't be in our lives at all. A year later, when our daughter Lily was born, they came to the hospital bearing gifts and tentative smiles. Patricia reached for the baby, then paused, looking to Rebecca for permission first, a small gesture that showed she was finally learning. "She has your eyes," Patricia said softly to Rebecca. "And Michael's stubborn chin," Rebecca replied, squeezing my hand. It wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect. But as I watched my wife holding our daughter, surrounded by complex but healing family relationships, I realized that sometimes winning isn't about defeating others. Sometimes it's about protecting what matters most while still leaving room for reconciliation. The security camera that caught Patricia's deception now captures happier moments. Lily's first steps, family holiday gatherings, everyday moments of joy. It serves as a reminder that sometimes the same technology that reveals painful truths can also document how far we've come in healing those wounds. In the end, what Patricia never understood was that Rebecca's inheritance was never about the monetary value of art or assets. The true inheritance was Rebecca's strength, her compassion, and her ability to forge her own path, qualities now being passed down to our daughter, the most valuable legacy of all. The moment I shared the security footage with Rebecca, everything changed. The look in her eyes transformed from confusion to betrayal, then settled into a cold determination I'd rarely seen from my typically compassionate wife. She requested water, took a moment to compose herself, and then asked me to help her get dressed. "I need to see those papers," she insisted, her voice still slightly slurred from the medication Patricia had pushed on her. "The originals, not whatever sanitized version my mother might show us later." I was concerned about her condition. "Becky, you're still under the effects of those sedatives. Maybe we should—" "No," she cut me off firmly. "Every hour we wait is another hour they have to cover their tracks. You know my father. He's probably already calling in favors." She was right. Harold Walsh's network of influence stretched through Portland's legal and medical communities. He'd cultivated these relationships for decades, presenting himself as a pillar of society while privately wielding that reputation as a weapon when necessary. "Okay," I conceded, "but we do this carefully. I'm calling Dr. Patel first, and we're getting you properly examined before anything else." Rebecca nodded, already reaching for her phone. "I'll call Sophia while you drive. We need legal representation immediately." As I helped Rebecca into the car, I noticed Patricia watching from our living room window. Her expression was unreadable, but the rigid set of her shoulders conveyed fury. I'd disrupted her carefully orchestrated plan, and Patricia Walsh was not a woman accustomed to failure. Dr. Patel fit us in immediately, his concern evident as he examined Rebecca and reviewed the medication she'd been given. "This is completely inappropriate," he said, holding up the bottle of sedatives. "These could cause serious interactions with your current treatment protocol. Who prescribed this?" "Dr. Mercer," Rebecca replied. "Apparently a lupus specialist my father knows." Dr. Patel's expression darkened. "I know Mercer. He's a rheumatologist, yes, but he's primarily a research physician, not a treating one. He hasn't maintained an active practice with patients for years." He tapped the prescription bottle. "And this dosage is excessive for someone with your body weight and condition." The implications hung heavily in the examination room. Either Dr. Mercer was criminally negligent or, more likely, He'd written this prescription as a favor to Harold without properly examining Rebecca. "I'm ordering blood work," Dr. Patel continued, "and I want you to stop taking this immediately. The sedative effect should wear off within 24 hours, but we need to monitor for any lasting impact." Rebecca gripped my hand. Could there be permanent damage?" The doctor's expression softened. "I don't think so. You haven't been on it long enough, and your liver function has always been strong. But Rebecca, this is serious. Whoever arranged this wasn't considering your medical well-being." From the hospital, we went directly to Sofia Martinez's law office. She'd cleared her afternoon schedule after my emergency call from London and was waiting with a legal pad full of notes. "First things first," she said after greeting us. "I filed emergency motions to freeze any changes to Rebecca's estate. Planning or medical directives. Nothing will be processed until we have a hearing." Rebecca sank into a chair, relief evident in her posture. "Thank you. Do you know exactly what I signed?" Sophia shook her head. "Not yet. I've requested copies from the county recorder's office, but if they haven't been filed yet, we'll need to get them directly from James Whitman or your parents." "They'll stall," I said. "Or worse, modify the documents before showing them to us." "That's why I've also submitted a preservation of evidence order," Sophia replied. "It specifically mentions the original documents Rebecca signed. If they destroy or alter them now, it's contempt of court." The legal machinery was in motion, but I knew Harold Walsh well enough to understand he wouldn't surrender easily. He hadn't built his fortune by conceding defeat at the first sign of resistance. "What about the security footage?" Rebecca asked. "Can we use it legally?" Sophia's expression was cautious. "Oregon is a one-party consent state for recordings, which typically means at least one person being recorded needs to consent. However, there's an exception for security systems in your own home, particularly when there's no reasonable expectation of privacy in that area." "The camera was in our bedroom," I pointed out. "Which complicates things slightly," she acknowledged. "But given that it was installed for medical monitoring purposes with Rebecca's knowledge and consent, and that you both own the home, we have a strong argument for its admissibility." She leaned forward. "The bigger question is what you want to do with this evidence." Rebecca and I exchanged glances. "What do you mean?" I asked. "This could be handled in various ways," Sophia explained. "We could use it merely as leverage to invalidate the documents. We could pursue civil action for fraud or coercion, or, given the medical component, administering unnecessary medication potentially harmful to Rebecca's health, there could even be criminal implications." The word criminal hung in the air between us. Despite everything, the thought of Patricia Walsh facing criminal charges seemed surreal. She was manipulative and controlling, certainly, but seeing her in handcuffs, it was difficult to imagine. Rebecca stared down at her hands. "I don't want my mother arrested," she said finally. "At least not yet. I want her stopped. I want those documents invalidated, and I want protections in place to prevent this from happening again. But she's still my mother." Sophia nodded. "That's perfectly reasonable. Let's focus on invalidating the documents and securing your assets first. We can always escalate if necessary." As we left Sophia's office, my phone buzzed. With a text from Daniel, "Call me ASAP." Daniel Collins had been my roommate in college and remained my closest friend. He now worked in digital forensics, and I'd sent him copies of the security footage as backup. I stepped aside to call him while Rebecca scheduled her follow-up blood work. "Michael," Daniel answered immediately. "I reviewed your footage. There's something you should know. The video was tampered with." My stomach dropped. "What? That's impossible. It uploads directly to encrypted cloud storage that only I can access." "I'm not saying you tampered with it," he clarified quickly. "I'm saying someone tried to There are clear signs that portions were deleted and replaced, but it was amateur work. The timecode jumps in places, and the audio doesn't perfectly sync in the replaced segments. When was this done? Based on the file metadata, about 4 hours after the original recording, someone accessed your system remotely. My mind raced. Could it have been Patricia? She mentioned trying to disable our security system. Unlikely she'd have the technical skills, Daniel replied, but she wouldn't need them if she had help. My guess? Your father-in-law has an IT team at his company. It made sense. Harold wouldn't get his hands dirty with technical details, but he'd certainly have resources at his disposal. Can you recover the original, unaltered footage? I asked. Already did, Daniel said. I'm sending you both versions, the tampered one and the restored original. The differences are subtle but important. They tried to edit out the most damning parts of Patricia's manipulation and make Rebecca appear more lucid and willing to sign. You're a lifesaver, Daniel. There's more, he continued. After seeing this, I ran a security scan on your home network. Michael, they installed remote access software on your router. They've potentially been monitoring your communications, maybe even accessing your computers and security system for weeks. The violation hit me like a physical blow. Our home, our private space, had been compromised. How long had they been watching us? What information had they gathered? The professional side of my brain kicked into gear. I need to replace the router immediately and reset all our passwords. Can you check if they've accessed anything else? Already on it, Daniel assured me. I'll send you a full report. In the meantime, assume any device connected to your home network has been compromised. Use only your mobile data until we've secured everything. When I hung up and explained the situation to Rebecca, her face went pale. They've been spying on us? In our own home? Her voice trembled with a mixture of shock and outrage. How could they justify that to themselves? I didn't have a good answer. The depth of Patricia and Harold's intrusion into our lives was still unfolding, each revelation more disturbing than the last. We spent the night at a hotel, both for Rebecca's safety and to give Daniel remote access to our home network without risk of interference. Neither of us slept much. Rebecca alternated between tearful disbelief that her parents would go to such lengths and cold anger at their betrayal. I focused on practical matters, listing every account that needed new passwords, coordinating with Daniel on securing our digital life, and preparing for the inevitable confrontation with the Walshes. By morning, Daniel had confirmed our worst fears. The remote access software had been installed 6 weeks earlier, shortly after Rebecca's hospitalization. They'd had access to our emails, our private conversations, potentially even our banking information. The violation was comprehensive. I want to go home, Rebecca said after I shared Daniel's findings. I want to face them today. Are you sure? I asked. Dr. Patel said you should rest, and Sophia advised. I don't care, she interrupted. This is my life they're trying to control, my inheritance, my marriage. She squared her shoulders. I need to look them in the eyes and hear their explanation face to face. I recognized the determined set of her jaw, the same expression she wore when presenting a controversial exhibition at the museum or defending an emerging artist to skeptical patrons. When Rebecca made up her mind this way, there was no dissuading her. All right, I agreed, but we do this on our terms. We meet them somewhere public, not our house, not theirs. She nodded. The museum, my office, it's neutral ground, but it's also where I'm strongest. I admired her strategic thinking even through her anger. The Portland Modern Art Museum was Rebecca's domain. There, surrounded by the work she had curated and the colleagues who respected her professional judgment, Patricia and Harold's usual tactics of intimidation would be less effective. When Rebecca called to arrange the meeting, Patricia initially refused. This is a family matter, she insisted. We're not discussing it in your workplace. Then, We're not discussing it at all, Rebecca replied, a new firmness in her voice. And I'll proceed with Sophia's recommendation to file a police report about the unauthorized medications and the tampering with our home security system. Patricia's sharp intake of breath was audible even to me, standing beside Rebecca. You wouldn't dare. Try me, Rebecca said simply. 2 o'clock in my office. Come or don't. It's your choice. But this is happening on my terms, not yours. After she hung up, Rebecca leaned against me, shaking slightly. Did I just threaten my mother with police action? I kissed the top of her head. You stood your ground. There's a difference. We arrived at the museum early. Rebecca wanted time to center herself in her professional space, surrounded by the contemporary art collection she had helped build over the past 5 years. Her assistant, Maya, brought tea and quietly closed the office door, offering a reassuring smile as she left. I've asked security to escort them directly here when they arrive, Rebecca explained, arranging a small conference table in the corner of her office. No wandering around, no chance to build up a performance for my colleagues, I nodded, admiring her foresight. Patricia, in particular, excelled at creating scenes that portrayed her as the reasonable party, subtle theatrics that put others on the defensive before conversations even began. At precisely 2 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. Museum security opened it to reveal Patricia and Harold, both dressed impeccably as always. Patricia wore a conservative navy dress that practically screamed reasonable mother concerned about her daughter. Harold was in one of his custom suits, the kind that projected authority without appearing ostentatious. Rebecca, darling, Patricia began, moving to embrace her daughter. Rebecca stepped back. Please sit down, both of you. The momentary flash of surprise on Patricia's face was quickly masked, but I caught it. She wasn't accustomed to Rebecca being so direct, especially not in professional settings where appearances mattered so much to the Walsh family. Harold took charge, as was his habit. Rebecca, Michael, I think there have been some misunderstandings. We're here to clear the air. Misunderstandings? Rebecca repeated. Is that what you call installing spyware on our home network? Or having me sign documents under false pretenses while heavily medicated? Or perhaps you mean the tampering with our security footage? Harold's expression remained impassive, but his eyes flicked briefly to Patricia, who had the grace to look uncomfortable. Those are serious accusations, he said carefully. They're not accusations, I interjected. They're established facts. We have the technical evidence of the network intrusion. We have both the tampered and original security footage. And we have the prescription for medication that Dr. Patel has confirmed was inappropriate and potentially dangerous for Rebecca's condition. Harold's jaw tightened. This wasn't proceeding as he'd anticipated. Usually, his mere presence was enough to intimidate people into backing down or at least negotiating on his terms. Whatever you think you saw or heard, Patricia began, you're misinterpreting. Everything I've done has been to protect Rebecca. Rebecca leaned forward. Protect me from what exactly? From making my own decisions, from choosing who controls my inheritance, from my husband? You're ill, Patricia said, as if explaining to a child. Your judgment is impaired. You might not realize it, but during flares, you're not yourself. And you think that justifies fraud? Rebecca asked. Because that's what this is, Mom. Legal fraud, medical fraud. You had me sign documents under false pretenses while impaired by medication that you arranged without my informed consent. We were trying to help, Harold insisted, his voice taking on the patronizing tone he often used when explaining financial matters to those he deemed less sophisticated. Rebecca, your grandmother's collection isn't just art. It's a significant asset. In your condition, you need proper asset management. My condition, Rebecca repeated slowly, does not affect my mental capacity. It never has. And my proper asset management includes my husband, whom I trust completely. Unlike you, too. He's never lied to me about legal documents or monitored my private communications without my knowledge. Patricia's facade finally cracked. He's using you, Rebecca. Can't you see that? He married you for your money, for your connections. Why else would a nobody software engineer pursue a Walsh? The room went silent. Even Harold looked startled by Patricia's outburst. I started to respond, but Rebecca held up her hand, stopping me. Is that really what you think, Mom? That no one could possibly love me for myself? That my only value is the Walsh name and money? Patricia backpedaled. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant, Rebecca interrupted. And it explains so much about how you've treated me my entire life. The constant control, the manipulation of my friendships and relationships. You don't see me as a person. You see me as an extension of yourselves, a piece of property to be managed. Harold attempted to regain control of the conversation. This emotional tangent isn't productive. We're here to discuss practical matters. No, Rebecca said firmly. We're here because you both violated my trust in the most fundamental way possible. You drugged me, lied to me, spied on me, and attempted to steal my inheritance through fraud. There will be consequences for those actions. Harold's expression hardened. Think carefully before you make threats, Rebecca. Family conflicts can become very messy when they enter the legal system. Is that supposed to frighten me? Rebecca asked, because from where I'm sitting, you're the ones who should be worried about legal consequences. Patricia turned to me, changing tactics. Michael, surely you can see this from our perspective. We're her parents. We've been looking after her interests her entire life. What I see, I replied evenly, is that you violated not only Rebecca's trust, but also her medical safety. The medication you arranged could have caused serious complications. With her existing treatment, as her husband, that's not something I can overlook or excuse. Harold stood up suddenly. This conversation isn't productive. Rebecca, when you're ready to discuss this rationally without your husband's interference, give us a call. Rebecca remained seated, her voice steady. Sit down, Dad. We're not finished. Something in her tone, a certainty and authority I'd rarely heard her use with her parents, made Harold pause. After a moment, he slowly returned to his seat. Here's what's going to happen, Rebecca continued. First, you will provide copies of every document I signed while medicated, the originals, today. Second, you will remove any and all surveillance software from our home systems and devices. Third, you will provide written confirmation that you will never attempt to access our private communications or home security again. Patricia started to object, but Rebecca wasn't finished. Finally, you will respect that I am an adult woman, capable of making my own decisions about my health, my marriage, and my inheritance. If you cannot abide by these boundaries, then our relationship, both personal and financial, will need to be reconsidered entirely. The silence that followed was profound. I watched my wife with a mixture of pride and admiration. This was a side of Rebecca I'd glimpsed occasionally in her professional life, but had rarely seen her direct toward her parents. The medication had fully worn off now, and her mind was clear enough to recognize and reject the patterns of control that had shaped much of her life. Harold was the first to recover. You're being dramatic, Rebecca. No one is suggesting you're incapable. The documents you had me sign suggest exactly that, she countered. They attempt to transfer control of my medical decisions and financial assets based on a determination of incapacity that could be made by doctors of your choosing, not my established medical team. Harold's surprise was genuine. That's not what James said the documents contained. Rebecca and I exchanged glances. Either Harold was lying or James Whitman had misrepresented the documents to him as well. Given what we knew of Harold's controlling nature, the latter seemed unlikely. Then you should read them more carefully before having your daughter sign them, I suggested. Patricia's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her purse. This has gone too far. Rebecca, we only wanted what's best for you. No, Rebecca said softly. You wanted what was best for the Walsh family image and assets. There's a difference. She stood up. I need those documents by the end of business today. Sophia Martinez will be expecting them at her office. Patricia looked to Harold, clearly expecting him to find a way out of this situation, as he had so many others. But even Harold Walsh, master negotiator and corporate strategist, seemed to recognize that his usual tactics wouldn't work here. Very well, he said finally. I'll have James send everything to your attorney. But Rebecca, think carefully about the implications of taking such an adversarial position with your own parents. There are broader family considerations. The implied threat that Rebecca might find herself cut off from the extended Walsh family hung in the air. Family had always been Patricia's most effective leverage against Rebecca, who valued those connections despite the complications. I have thought carefully, Rebecca replied. I've had 6 years of watching you both undermine my marriage and question my decisions. I've had a lifetime of conditional love based on compliance with your expectations. I'm done with that dynamic. As they prepared to leave, Patricia made one last attempt. The medications were prescribed by a legitimate doctor, Rebecca. Whatever Michael has told you, we're prescribed without examining me, Rebecca finished for her. Without consulting my medical records or speaking with my treating physician. Dr. Patel has already filed a complaint with the medical board about Dr. Mercer's conduct. Patricia blanched. That's unnecessary and vindictive. No, Rebecca said firmly. It's protecting other patients from dangerous prescribing practices, much like I'm now protecting myself from your dangerous controlling practices. Why, after they left, Rebecca collapsed into her office chair, the composed professional facade crumbling into exhausted relief. I can't believe I just did that. I knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in mine. You were magnificent, truly. She gave me a weak smile. They'll retaliate. They always do when they don't get their way. Probably, I agreed. But we're prepared now. No more surprises, no more manipulation in the shadows. Whatever comes next, we face it together, eyes open. Rebecca leaned forward to rest her forehead. Against mine. I wish I could have parents who simply love me without trying to control me. Is that too much to ask? I had no answer that wouldn't sound trite or dismissive of her pain. Instead, I simply held her, letting her cry quietly in the safety of her office, mourning not just the events of the past week, but the relationship with her parents that she'd always wanted and never truly had. Later that evening, as promised, James Whitman delivered a sealed envelope to Sophia's office containing copies of the documents Rebecca had signed. Sophia called us immediately. It's worse than we thought, she said without preamble. These aren't just updates to Rebecca's will. There's a trust agreement that would transfer all her separate property, including the art collection, into a family trust controlled by Harold as trustee. There's a healthcare directive giving Patricia equal authority to her physicians for treatment decisions. And there's a durable power of attorney that would activate if any two physicians, determine she's unable to manage her affairs due to her medical condition. The scope of the deception was breathtaking. These documents, taken together, would have given Harold and Patricia near-complete control over Rebecca's life and assets at the first significant lupus flare. Can they be invalidated? I asked. Absolutely, Sophia assured us. They were signed under duress, and while impaired by medication, the security footage alone is probably enough, but combined with Dr. Patel's evaluation of the inappropriate medication, it's open and shut. No judge would uphold these documents once they saw the evidence. Rebecca had been silent, listening to Sophia outline the legal trap her parents had attempted to spring. Now she spoke, her voice eerily calm. "I want new estate documents drawn, up immediately, completely new, and I want serious legal protections against any future attempts like this." "I've already started drafting them," Sophia replied. "But Rebecca, there's something else you should know. There's a clause in here about your future children." "What?" Rebecca and I said simultaneously. "If you have children, this trust would automatically become their inheritance vehicle, with Harold as trustee until they reach age 35. The clause specifically excludes you, Michael, from any management role in their inheritance." The calculated cruelty of it struck me to my core. Not content with trying to control Rebecca's inheritance, they had attempted to reach forward into the next generation, ensuring their control would extend beyond their daughter to potential grandchildren. "They really thought of everything," Rebecca said hollowly. "Not everything," Sophia corrected. "They didn't anticipate that you would discover what they'd done so quickly, or that you would have evidence of the circumstances under which you signed. They underestimated both of you." As we drove home from Sophia's office, Rebecca stared out the window at the Portland skyline, lost in thought. Our house would be clear of surveillance now. Daniel had personally replaced our router and swept for additional devices, but the feeling of violation lingered. "I keep thinking about all our conversations they might have heard," Rebecca said quietly, "all the private moments they observed. How do we ever feel secure again?" I reached over to take her hand. "We rebuild. We strengthen our boundaries. We create a home that's truly ours, not an extension of the Walsh family compound." She squeezed my fingers. "I'm so tired of fighting them, Michael. So tired of constantly having to defend our choices, our marriage, my independence." "Then let's stop fighting," I suggested. "Let's just live our lives on our terms, set clear boundaries, enforce them when necessary, but otherwise focus on building the future we want, not responding to their manipulations." Rebecca turned to look at me, a spark returning to her eyes. "You know what? That's exactly what we should do." She straightened in her seat. "And I know where to start." "Where?" "Grandmother's art collection, the pieces they're so desperate to control. I'm going to make some decisions about those works that have nothing to do with what my parents want." I smiled, recognizing the determined set of her jaw. "I'm listening." "Some pieces belong in museums, where they can be appreciated by everyone. Some should stay in our family for future generations, but none, not a single one, should be used as leverage or control. That's not what art is for, and it's not what my grandmother intended when she left them to me." As we pulled into our driveway, Rebecca looked at our home with new eyes. "We need to reclaim this space," she said, "make it truly ours again." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. It wasn't just about new security or privacy measures. It was about psychological ownership, taking back the sense of safety and sanctuary that Patricia and Harold had violated. "Where do we start?" I asked. Rebecca smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen since discovering the tampered drink days earlier. "With the bedroom. I think it's time to rearrange everything, repaint, make it completely different from what they saw through those cameras." As we entered our home, Rebecca paused in the entryway, her expression resolute. "They thought they could control me by exploiting my illness. Instead, they've freed me from any obligation to maintain the fiction that their behavior is acceptable." I put my arm around her shoulders. "So what comes next?" She leaned into me, drawing strength from our connection. "Healing, boundaries, and building a life that's authentically ours, regardless of what Patricia and Harold Walsh think it should be." For the first time since returning from London to find my wife sedated and manipulated, I felt genuine hope. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Rebecca's clarity about who she was and what she wanted gave me confidence that we would navigate it successfully, together. 3 days after our confrontation with Harold and Patricia at the museum, we received an unexpected call from Rebecca's brother, Christopher. He and his wife, Natalie, rarely reached out independently. Most family communications went through Patricia, who tightly controlled the flow of information among the Walsh children. "Chris, is everything okay?" Rebecca answered, concern evident in her voice. I could hear only Rebecca's side of the conversation, but her expressions told the story. Surprise, then confusion, followed by a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. "Yes, we can meet you," she said finally. "Tomorrow for lunch works, just the 4 of us." After a pause, she added firmly, "No, Chris, not at their house. Let's meet at Riverside Cafe downtown." When she hung up, she stared at her phone as if it might explain her brother's unusual behavior. "What did he want?" I asked. "To talk," she replied. "Apparently, my parents called a family meeting last night with Chris and Natalie. They told some version of what happened. Chris wasn't specific, but he said something didn't add up. He wants to hear our side." This was unprecedented. Christopher Walsh had always been the perfect son, following his father's career path in finance and rarely questioning his parents' decisions or narratives. For him to seek Rebecca's perspective independently suggested a significant crack in the Walsh family's unified front. "Do you think it's a trap?" I asked, my suspicion of the Walsh family dynamics now ingrained after years of subtle and not so subtle manipulations. Rebecca considered this. "I don't think so." Chris sounded genuinely confused, maybe even worried. He mentioned that Natalie challenged some of what my parents said, which apparently led to an uncomfortable exchange. The next day, Rebecca and I arrived at Riverside Cafe 15 minutes early. Rebecca was nervous, fidgeting with her napkin and scanning the entrance repeatedly. Christopher and his wife were punctual as always, a Walsh family trait that had been drilled into them since childhood. The physical resemblance between Rebecca and her brother was striking. They shared the same auburn hair and tall, slender build, though Christopher carried himself with the rigid posture of someone perpetually ready for inspection. Natalie, in contrast, had always seemed slightly out of place in Walsh family gatherings, warm and direct where the others were reserved and circumspect. "Becky," Christopher said, giving his sister a stiff but genuine hug, "you look better than I expected." "What were you expecting?" I asked, perhaps more sharply than intended. "Mom said you were having a severe flare," he explained to Rebecca, "that you were confused, maybe even experiencing neurological symptoms." Rebecca's expression hardened. "I'm sure she did. That's part of what we need to discuss." After ordering, Christopher got straight to the point, another Walsh trait that occasionally served him well. "What exactly happened?" "Mom and Dad told us you'd signed some updated healthcare documents during your recent hospitalization, and now you're trying to revoke them because Michael convinced you they were somehow inappropriate." Rebecca took a deep breath. "That's not remotely accurate, Chris. Do you want to know what really happened?" For the next 20 minutes, Rebecca walked her brother and sister-in-law through the events: the hospitalization, Patricia's manipulation, the unauthorized medication, the security footage, and the documents that would have effectively transferred control of her healthcare decisions and financial assets to her parents. Christopher's face grew increasingly pale as she spoke. Natalie, meanwhile, seemed less surprised and more confirmed in some private suspicion. "You have proof of all this?" Christopher asked when Rebecca finished. "Extensive proof," I confirmed. "Security footage, medical records confirming the inappropriate medication, forensic evidence of tampering with our home network, and of course, the documents themselves, which go far beyond standard healthcare directives." Christopher ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I'd rarely seen from him. "This doesn't make sense. Why would they do this?" Roar, control, Natalie said quietly, speaking for the first time. It's always been about control with your parents, Chris. You just don't see it because you've never challenged them. The look Christopher gave his wife suggested this was a continuation of a previous conversation, perhaps even an ongoing point of contention in their marriage. They told us Rebecca was experiencing cognitive decline, Christopher said, that the documents were protective measures recommended by her doctors. I have one doctor managing my lupus, Rebecca replied. Dr. Patel. He never recommended any such measures, and he's furious about the medication Mom arranged through her friend Dr. Mercer, which, by the way, could have caused serious complications with my existing treatment. Christopher looked genuinely troubled. Mom wouldn't put your health at risk. That doesn't make any sense. Doesn't it? Natalie asked, reaching for her husband's hand. Chris, remember when we were first married and your mother kept insisting I see Dr. Lawrence about my anxiety? The medication he prescribed made me feel like a zombie for months before we realized what was happening. This was news to both Rebecca and me. We exchanged startled glances as Christopher shifted uncomfortably. That was different, he muttered, but with little conviction. Was it? Natalie pressed. Or was it another case of your mother using medical intervention to make someone in the family more compliant? The implications hung heavily over our table. For the first time, I wondered if Patricia's behavior toward Rebecca was not an isolated case, but part of a pattern that extended to other family members who didn't conform to her expectations. Rebecca leaned toward her brother. Chris, I don't think Mom and Dad intended to harm me physically, but they absolutely intended to take control of my assets and medical decisions without my informed consent. They lied to me. They secretly medicated me, and they spied on us in our own home. None of that is okay, no matter how they might justify it. Christopher stared at his untouched lunch. I need to see the documents. Sophia has copies, I said. We can go to her office after lunch if you want. He nodded, then looked at Rebecca with genuine concern. Are you okay? Really? The simple question, asked without agenda or manipulation, brought tears to Rebecca's eyes. I'm getting there, she said softly. It's been a lot to process. After lunch, we took Christopher and Natalie to Sophia's office, where they reviewed the documents, the security footage, and the technical evidence Daniel had compiled about the network intrusion. Christopher's finance background made him particularly adept at understanding the legal implications of the trust documents. This would give Dad complete control of your inheritance, he said, pointing to a particularly concerning clause. And look at this. Even if you contested it later, all legal fees would be paid from the trust itself, essentially forcing you to fund both sides of any dispute. It gets worse, Sophia added, turning to a tabbed section. This provision allows for the involuntary psychiatric evaluation of Rebecca if Harold, as trustee, deems it necessary for her protection. Christopher looked up sharply. That can't be legal. It's not if challenged, Sophia confirmed, but imagine how difficult it would be for Rebecca to mount a legal challenge if she was simultaneously dealing with a health crisis and a psychiatric hold initiated by her parents. The calculated nature of the documents seemed to finally penetrate Christopher's reluctance to see his parents in a negative light. He pushed the papers away as if they were physically distasteful. I had no idea, he said quietly. They told us they were helping you through a difficult time. Well, they weren't, Rebecca replied simply. They were exploiting my illness to take control of my life. The drive home after the meeting was silent, both Rebecca and I processing the revelations of the day. Christopher's shock had seemed genuine, suggesting that Rebecca's parents compartmentalized their manipulative behavior, presenting different faces to different family members. "Do you think Chris will confront them?" I asked finally. Rebecca sighed. "I don't know. He's always been their golden child, the one who followed the Walsh family plan perfectly. This might be too much for him to reconcile with his image of them." Natalie seemed less surprised, I observed. "Yes," Rebecca agreed. "I'm beginning to think Natalie might have been dealing with her own version of my mother's control tactics for years." That evening, as we were preparing dinner, Rebecca's phone rang again. It was Natalie, calling without Christopher. "I needed to talk to you alone," she said, her voice low as if concerned about being overheard. "There's something you should know about your parents' financial situation." Rebecca put the call on speaker so I could hear. "What about it?" "They're not as secure as everyone thinks," Natalie revealed. "Chris doesn't know I know this. He tries to protect me from family financial stress, but I've seen the documents. Harold made some bad investments about 3 years ago, really bad. They've been liquidating assets quietly ever since." The revelation struck me as both surprising and illuminating. Harold Walsh projected an image of unwavering financial success. The idea that he might be struggling financially cast his desperate grab for Rebecca's inheritance in a new light. "How bad is it?" Rebecca asked. "Bad enough that they've mortgaged the Lake Washington house," Natalie replied. "And I'm pretty sure they've been living partly on credit for at least a year. They're not destitute, not even close, but they're not the financial powerhouses they pretend to be. And my grandmother's art collection would provide a significant influx of liquid assets," Rebecca concluded, the pieces falling into place. "Exactly," Natalie confirmed. "I think that's why they're so desperate to control it." After the call ended, Rebecca and I sat at our kitchen counter, recalibrating our understanding of the situation in light of this new information. "It makes a twisted kind of sense," I said. "Your parents' entire identity is built around wealth and social standing. If they're secretly struggling financially, they'd do anything to maintain the facade," Rebecca finished, "including stealing my inheritance." She shook her head. "It doesn't excuse what they did, but it explains the desperation behind it." This financial context added another dimension to the Walsh family dynamics. Harold and Patricia weren't just controlling parents. They were desperate people trying to maintain an increasingly precarious lifestyle and social position. The next morning, we woke to multiple missed calls from Christopher. When Rebecca finally reached him, his voice was tight with stress. "I confronted them," he said without preamble. "Last night, after reviewing everything, it didn't go well." "What happened?" Rebecca asked, putting the call on speaker again, as we sat on the edge of our bed. "Dad denied everything at first, said you were manipulating the evidence. When I showed him the specific clauses in the documents, the ones I'd highlighted at Sophia's office, he switched tactics, said it was all for your own good, that you weren't capable of managing your health or finances during flares. And Mom," Rebecca prompted when Christopher paused. "Mom was—" He hesitated. "She was scary, Becky, ice cold. Said I was betraying the family by siding with you, that I didn't understand what was at stake. When Natalie tried to intervene, Mom told her to remember her place." The contempt in Patricia's phrase, "remember her place," hung in the air between us. It crystallized everything about how Patricia viewed family. A hierarchy with herself and Harold at the top, everyone else expected to follow their directives without question. "What did you do?" Rebecca asked softly. "We left," Christopher replied, "packed an overnight bag and went to a hotel. I've never seen that side of them before, Becky. It was like talking to strangers wearing our parents' faces." The pain in his voice was palpable. Christopher was experiencing the same disorienting revelation that Rebecca had been processing for days, that the parents they thought they knew were capable of calculated deception and manipulation when their control was threatened. "I'm sorry, Chris," Rebecca said. "I know how hard this must be for you." "For me." He sounded genuinely surprised. "Becky, what they tried to do to you. I can't even imagine how betrayed you must feel." His empathy, so unexpected from the brother who had traditionally aligned with their parents, brought fresh tears to Rebecca's eyes. "It helps to know you believe me," she said simply. "Of course I believe you," he replied. "The evidence is undeniable. And frankly, now that I'm really thinking about it, there have been signs of this controlling behavior for years. I just never wanted to see it." After hanging up, Rebecca leaned against me, emotional exhaustion evident in the slump of her shoulders. "I never expected Chris to take my side against them. Never." "People can surprise you," I said, holding her close. "Sometimes in terrible ways, like your parents, but sometimes in wonderful ways too." The unexpected alliance with Christopher and Natalie shifted the family dynamics dramatically over the next few weeks. Harold and Patricia, realizing they had lost the support of both their children, changed tactics. Instead of direct confrontation, they retreated into injured dignity, casting themselves as victims of ungrateful children who didn't appreciate their parental concern. They attempted to rally the extended Walsh family to their side, calling elderly aunts and family friends to share their carefully edited version of events. Some relatives called Rebecca, concerned about the family conflict they'd heard about. With each call, Rebecca patiently explained her side, not attacking her parents, but simply stating the facts about what had occurred. "Your mother is beside herself with worry," Aunt Margaret told Rebecca during one such call. "She says you've cut them off completely, that you won't even let them check on your health." "That's not accurate, Aunt Margaret," Rebecca replied calmly. "I've established boundaries about my medical care and financial decisions, which they've repeatedly tried to control without my consent. I'm open to a relationship with them if they can respect those boundaries." Most family members, hearing both sides, adopted a neutral family disputes are complicated position, unwilling to explicitly take sides against either Harold and Patricia or Rebecca. A few older relatives, steeped in traditional notions of parental authority, sided with Harold and Patricia, but surprisingly, several younger cousins reached out privately to express support for Rebecca. "Your stand against Aunt Patricia has been a long time coming," Cousin Elise wrote in an email. "She's been the family puppet master for decades. No one's had the courage to call her out before." 3 weeks after our confrontation at the museum, Sophia completed the new estate documents for Rebecca. These papers explicitly excluded Harold and Patricia from any role in Rebecca's healthcare decisions or financial management, named me as her healthcare proxy with our friend Daniel as backup, and created a straightforward will that distributed her inheritance according to her own wishes, some pieces to museums, some to remain in our family, none under Harold's control. The documents also included unusually robust provisions against coercion or undue influence, requiring any future changes to be witnessed by multiple parties, including Rebecca's physician and independent legal counsel. "This is as bulletproof as I can make it," Sophia explained, as Rebecca signed the final page. "If they try something like this again, these protections should stop them cold." Rebecca set down the pen with a sense of finality. "I hate that this is necessary, that I need legal protection from my own parents." "I know," Sophia said gently. "But acknowledging the reality of your situation isn't the same as accepting it as normal or okay. These documents aren't just legal protection. They're boundaries that help you maintain a healthy relationship with yourself and your autonomy." That perspective, framing the legal documents as self-care rather than family rejection, seemed to bring Rebecca some peace. As we left Sophia's office, her steps were lighter, her shoulders straighter. I feel like I can breathe again, she admitted as we walked to the car. Like I'm reclaiming something essential that I didn't even realize was being taken from me all these years. The next challenge came in the form of a letter from Harold's attorney, James Whitman. It struck a conciliatory tone while subtly attempting to reframe the narrative. My clients recognize that there have been unfortunate misunderstandings regarding Rebecca's healthcare and estate planning, the letter read. They propose a family meeting with all parties and their legal representatives to resolve these issues amicably, with the goal of restoring family harmony while ensuring Rebecca's well-being remains the priority. Sophia advised caution. This is a sophisticated approach, she noted. They're no longer denying what happened, but recasting it as a misunderstanding rather than deliberate deception. The framing of ensuring Rebecca's well-being is particularly telling. It maintains the premise that Rebecca needs their oversight. So we decline? I asked. Not necessarily, Sophia replied. A meeting on neutral ground with clear agenda items and all parties represented might actually help establish the new normal, but we need to be careful about the framing. Rebecca considered this. I don't want to close the door completely on a relationship with them. They're still my parents, however flawed. But I won't compromise on my autonomy or pretend what they did was a simple misunderstanding. Sophia drafted a response that accepted the concept of a meeting, but rejected the characterization of events as misunderstandings. It also specified that any discussion would be premised on Harold and Patricia's acknowledgement of their actions and recognition of Rebecca's right to make her own medical and financial decisions. Ball's in their court now, Sophia said as she sent the letter. Their response will tell us a lot about whether genuine reconciliation is possible. Harold and Patricia's reply came through James Whitman 3 days later. They agreed to the meeting, but ignored the request for acknowledgement of their actions, focusing instead on looking forward rather than dwelling on past events. Classic deflection, Sophia observed. They want the appearance of reconciliation without the substance of accountability. Rebecca was torn. Part of me wants to demand they acknowledge what they did before we meet. Another part just wants to move forward, establish new boundaries, and try to salvage some kind of relationship. What kind of relationship would that be? I asked gently. One where their violation of your trust remains unaddressed? Where they pretend nothing happened? She sighed. I don't know. I just know that completely cutting them off feels extreme. It doesn't have to be all or nothing, Sophia suggested. You can maintain limited contact with firm boundaries while still requiring accountability over time. We ultimately agreed to the meeting on Rebecca's terms. It would be held at Sophia's office. Christopher and Natalie would also attend, and the agenda would focus on establishing clear boundaries for any future relationship, rather than relitigating the past. The day before the scheduled meeting, Dr. Patel called with unexpected news. The medical board had reviewed his complaint about Dr. Mercer's inappropriate prescribing and had taken action. They've placed him on probation pending a full investigation, Dr. Patel reported. More importantly, they're reviewing all his recent prescriptions, particularly those for patients he hasn't personally examined. The implications were significant. If Dr. Mercer had prescribed inappropriate medications for others at Harold or Patricia's request, it could suggest a pattern of medical manipulation extending beyond Rebecca. Should we notify the board about my specific situation? Rebecca asked. I've already provided them with the relevant details, anonymized to protect your privacy, Dr. Patel replied. But if you're willing to file a formal statement, it would strengthen the case against this kind of prescribing practice. Rebecca didn't hesitate. Send me whatever forms I need to complete. This isn't just about me anymore. Her willingness to take this stand marked another evolution in how she understood her parents' actions. What had initially felt like a personal betrayal, she now recognized as potentially part of a broader pattern that could harm others, if left unchallenged. The family meeting was set for 10 a.m. the following day. As Rebecca and I prepared for bed the night before, she seemed unusually calm. "Aren't you nervous about tomorrow?" I asked, watching her methodically apply her nighttime medications. She considered the question. "Not really. A month ago I would have been anxious about confronting my parents, worried about their disapproval or manipulation. Now I'm just clear about who I am, what I need, and what kind of relationship I'm willing to accept with them." I smiled, recognizing the quiet strength that had always been part of Rebecca, but had often been overshadowed by her parents' domineering presence. "They won't expect that clarity." "No," she agreed. "They won't. They'll expect the daughter. They've always been able to manage and direct, but that person doesn't exist anymore. Maybe she never really did." As we turned out the lights, Rebecca added softly, "You know what the strangest part is? I'm actually grateful this happened. Not for what they did, but for how it forced me to see the truth and find my voice. I don't think I would have broken free of their influence otherwise." I gathered her close in the darkness, marveling at her resilience. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I'm so proud of you." "I know," she whispered back. "That's why I can face them now, because I have people in my life who love me for who I am, not for who they want me to be." As sleep began to claim us, I reflected on how profoundly our lives had changed in just a few short weeks. What had begun as a shocking betrayal had catalyzed a transformation in Rebecca, a reclaiming of her autonomy and a clarity about her own worth that her parents had systematically undermined for years. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for tonight, we rested in the certainty that whatever happened with Harold and Patricia Walsh, Rebecca's hard-won freedom from their manipulation was something no legal document or family meeting could ever take away. The morning of the family meeting arrived with an unusual clarity to the Portland air. As Rebecca and I drove to Sophia's office, the city seemed washed clean by overnight rain, the buildings sharp-edged against a rare blue winter sky. "It feels symbolic somehow," Rebecca observed, gazing out the window, "like everything's been stripped down to its essentials." I reached over to squeeze her hand, admiring her composure. "How are you feeling about seeing them?" She considered this. "Resolved. I'm not angry anymore, not really. I'm just determined to establish a new reality with them, one based on truth rather than manipulation." When we arrived, Sophia was waiting in the conference room with coffee and pastries arranged on a side table. A professional touch that somehow normalized the extraordinary situation we were facing. Christopher and Natalie arrived shortly after, both looking tense but supportive. "Any last-minute advice?" Christopher asked Sophia, straightening his tie in a nervous gesture reminiscent of his father. "Stay unified," she replied simply. "Your parents excel at finding and exploiting divisions. Don't let them create any today." At exactly 10 o'clock, the receptionist announced the arrival of Harold and Patricia Walsh, accompanied by James Whitman. As they entered the conference room, I was struck by the careful presentation. Patricia wore a conservative blue dress that projected maternal concern without ostentation. Harold was impeccable in a grey suit that conveyed authority without aggression. Even their expressions were perfectly calibrated, solemn but open, concerned but not defensive. It was a performance, I realized, one they'd probably rehearsed. "Rebecca, darling," Patricia began, moving forward as if to embrace her daughter. Rebecca took a subtle step back. "Let's sit down and begin, shall we?" The slight narrowing of Patricia's eyes was the only indication of her displeasure at this rebuff. Harold nodded to Christopher with formal civility, pointedly avoiding my gaze. Once everyone was seated, Sophia took control of the meeting, outlining the agenda with professional efficiency. We're here to establish parameters for moving forward. To be clear, Rebecca has already executed new estate planning documents that cannot be challenged or altered without substantial legal process and multiple independent witnesses. Those matters are settled. Today's discussion concerns only the nature of your family relationship going forward. James Whitman cleared his throat. Before we proceed, my clients wish to express their sincere regret for any misunderstandings that have occurred. Their actions were motivated solely by concern for Rebecca's well-being during a difficult health period. Misunderstandings, Rebecca repeated, her voice level. Is that how we're characterizing what happened? Harold shifted forward. Rebecca, you have to understand our position. When a parent sees their child suffering, they take action. Perhaps our approach was imperfect, but our intentions. Drugging me without my knowledge or consent wasn't imperfect, Rebecca interrupted. It was illegal. Installing surveillance software on our home network wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a violation of our privacy, and having me sign documents that would give you control of my assets while I was impaired wasn't well-intentioned. It was fraud. The blunt assessment hung in the air. Patricia's carefully composed expression flickered, revealing a flash of something harder beneath. We never intended, she began. What you intended doesn't matter, Rebecca cut in. What you did matters, and what you did was calculate exactly how to exploit my illness to gain control of my inheritance and medical decisions. Harold's jaw tightened. That's an extremely uncharitable interpretation of events. It's an accurate one, Christopher interjected, surprising everyone with his directness. Dad, I've read the documents. They went far beyond standard healthcare directives or asset protection. They were engineered to transfer control from Rebecca to you and Mom with minimal oversight or recourse. Harold turned to his son with evident displeasure. You lack the legal background to make that assessment, Christopher. Actually, Sophia interceded. As a financial professional, Christopher is quite qualified to understand the implications of trust provisions and asset transfers. His analysis is correct. Patricia, recognizing that direct denial was failing, shifted tactics. We're all getting distracted by legal technicalities. This is about family, about a mother's concern for her daughter during a frightening health crisis. Is that why you had me sign documents you misrepresented? Rebecca asked, out of maternal concern? You were confused, Patricia insisted. You needed protection. From what? Rebecca pressed. From my husband. From making my own decisions about my grandmother's art collection. What exactly were you protecting me from? Patricia glanced at Harold. A barely perceptible request for support. He cleared his throat. The stress of managing complex assets during health crises can exacerbate autoimmune conditions. We were trying to alleviate that burden by transferring my assets to a family trust you control, Rebecca noted. How convenient for you, especially given your current financial difficulties. The effect of this statement was immediate. Harold's composure cracked, his face flushing with anger or embarrassment, perhaps both. Patricia went very still, her knuckles whitening where she gripped her handbag. What did you say? Harold asked, his voice dangerously quiet. We know about the investment losses, Christopher said, backing his sister. The mortgages, the credit lines. You're not in financial ruin, but you're not as secure as you've led everyone to believe. And Rebecca's inheritance would solve a lot of problems for you, wouldn't it? James Whitman intervened smoothly. I fail to see how the Walsh family's private financial matters are relevant to today's discussion. They're relevant because They provide context for what otherwise appears to be simple control for control's sake, Sophia replied. They establish motive. Motive, Patricia repeated, indignation coloring her voice. You're speaking as if we committed a crime. Obtaining signatures on legal documents through deception while the signer is impaired by medication is fraud, Sophia stated flatly. Installing surveillance software on someone's private network without their knowledge is a violation of federal computer fraud statutes. So yes, Mrs. Walsh, we are indeed discussing criminal acts. The facade of parental concern finally shattered. Completely. Harold leaned forward, his expression cold. If that's your position, we have nothing further to discuss. Rebecca, if you want to pursue this adversarial path, understand what it means, not just for your relationship with us, but for your standing in this community and this family. The threat was thinly veiled, but Rebecca didn't flinch. I'm not the one who created this adversarial situation, she replied calmly. I simply discovered what you had done and took steps to protect myself. As for my standing in the community, I'll take my chances. The truth tends to speak for itself. Patricia made one last appeal, turning to Christopher. Surely you can see how this has all spiraled out of proportion. Your sister is being influenced. Stop, Christopher interrupted firmly. Don't do that, Mom. Don't try to suggest Rebecca isn't thinking for herself. She's shown more clarity and courage in the past few weeks than I've seen from either of you in years. Patricia recoiled as if slapped. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, she had lost control of the narrative within her own family. Her children were united against her, immune to her manipulations. Harold stood abruptly. This meeting is clearly unproductive. James, we're leaving. If you leave now, Sophia warned, the terms Rebecca has prepared for any future contact will be delivered formally through legal channels rather than discussed in person. Harold hesitated, visibly calculating the social and practical implications of receiving legal documents establishing terms for contact with his own daughter. What terms? He asked finally. Rebecca met his gaze steadily. Straightforward. One's no discussion of my health except in general terms. No advice, solicited or otherwise, about my medical care or finances. No attempts to contact my doctors or financial advisors. No visits to our home without explicit invitation. Basic. Boundaries that most people wouldn't need spelled out, but which recent events suggest you require in writing. The simplicity and reasonableness of these terms made Harold's opposition difficult to justify, even to himself. He slowly sat back down. And if we agree to these boundaries, then we can have a relationship, Rebecca said simply. Limited and conditional at first, but with the potential to rebuild trust over time. And if we don't, then we don't have a relationship at all. The starkness of the choice silenced the room. Patricia looked genuinely shocked, as if the possibility of her daughter choosing complete estrangement had never seemed real to her until this moment. You would cut us off completely, she asked, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. Your own parents? I would protect myself from further harm, Rebecca corrected gently, which is what any healthy person would do when faced with repeated violations of their autonomy and trust. The meeting concluded not with reconciliation, but with an uneasy ceasefire. Harold and Patricia agreed to consider the proposed boundaries to be formalized in a document Sophia would prepare. Whether they would ultimately accept them remained to be seen, but the power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. Rebecca was no longer asking for their approval or acceptance. She was setting the terms under which she would permit them in her life. As they left the conference room, Patricia paused beside Rebecca's chair. This isn't who we raised you to be, she said softly. Rebecca looked up at her mother with clear eyes. You're right. It's who I've become despite how you raised me. That's the part you never understood. I was always more than just an extension of the Walsh family. I was always my own person, even when you couldn't see it. In the days following the meeting, an unexpected peace settled over our home. Having finally confronted her parents directly, with witnesses present, Rebecca seemed unburdened in a way I hadn't seen before. She moved through our rooms with new confidence, rearranged furniture according to her preferences rather than Patricia's subtle suggestions, and even painted our bedroom a rich terracotta color that Patricia had once dismissed as common. It feels like reclaiming spaces inside myself that I didn't even realize had been colonized, she explained one evening as we sat on our newly arranged patio. Like I've spent my whole life making myself smaller to fit their vision. And now, I'm finally expanding to my actual size. Christopher and Natalie became regular visitors, their relationship with Rebecca deepening now that Patricia no longer mediated their interactions. One Sunday afternoon, as the four of us shared a leisurely brunch, Christopher raised his glass. "To freedom," he said simply. "I don't think I realized how constrained we all were until recently." Natalie smiled. "Speak for yourself. Some of us have been aware of the cage for years." Her gentle teasing reflected a new openness between them, a willingness to acknowledge the complex family dynamics that had shaped their marriage. It was healing to witness, not just for them, but for Rebecca as well, who no longer felt isolated in her recognition of her parents' controlling behaviors. A week after the meeting, Harold sent a formal response through James Whitman. He and Patricia would accept Rebecca's terms in the interest of family harmony, though the phrasing suggested they still viewed themselves as making a generous concession rather than accepting accountability. "It's the best we're going to get," Rebecca acknowledged as we reviewed the letter with Sophia. "They're incapable of admitting they were wrong. But as long as they adhere to the boundaries, maybe we can establish some kind of workable relationship." The first test of this new arrangement came when Patricia requested to meet Rebecca for lunch. Rebecca suggested a public restaurant downtown, neutral territory where Patricia would be less likely to create a scene. "Do you want me to come with you?" I offered the morning of the lunch. Rebecca considered this, then shook her head. "No, I need to do this myself, establish the new normal without relying on anyone else to protect me." I admired her courage, but worried nonetheless. "Call me if you need anything. I can be there in 15 minutes. She kissed me goodbye. "I know, but I don't think I'll need rescuing today." When she returned 3 hours later, I was surprised to see her looking thoughtful rather than distressed. "How did it go?" I asked, searching her face for signs of emotional turmoil. "Strangely," she replied, settling beside me on the couch, "Mom was different. Subdued. She actually asked questions about my work and seemed to listen to the answers. No commentary about my health, no subtle digs about my choices, just conversation." "That's unexpected," I admitted. "What do you think changed?" Rebecca considered this. "I'm not sure. Maybe seeing that both her children are united in establishing boundaries. Maybe realizing that her usual tactics won't work anymore. Or maybe..." She paused. "Maybe there's a part of her that actually wants a real relationship with me, not just control." I remained skeptical, but kept it to myself. Patricia had shown remarkable consistency in her controlling behaviors over the years. One civil lunch didn't indicate a fundamental personality change. "What happens next?" I asked instead. "I don't know," Rebecca admitted. "We take it one interaction at a time, I guess. Maintain the boundaries, see if they can adapt to the new reality." That evening we received another unexpected call, this time from James Whitman himself, requesting a private meeting with both of us. Concerned about what new legal maneuver might be coming, we consulted with Sophia, who agreed to join us for the meeting at her office the following day. James arrived alone, carrying a slim leather portfolio that he placed carefully on the conference table. "Thank you for meeting with me," he began formally. "What I'm about to share is not at Harold or Patricia's request. In fact, they have no knowledge of this meeting." My suspicion immediately heightened. Then why are we here? James looked uncomfortable for perhaps the first time since I'd met him. "Because after 30 years of representing the Walsh family, I find myself in an ethical dilemma, one that pertains directly to Rebecca's inheritance." He opened the portfolio and removed several documents, sliding them across the table. "These are the original notes I made when Dorothy Walsh, your grandmother, Rebecca, was planning her estate. They detail her specific intentions regarding the art collection." Rebecca leaned forward, scanning the handwritten pages. "Why are you showing us these now?" "Because the documents I drafted for your parents, the ones you signed while medicated, directly contravened Dorothy's explicitly stated wishes." His professional demeanor cracked slightly. "I justified it to myself as following my client's instructions, Harold's instructions, but seeing how those documents were obtained—" He shook his head. "There are limits to what attorney-client privilege should protect." The implication was clear. James Whitman, longtime Walsh family lawyer, was breaking ranks. The notes revealed that Rebecca's grandmother had specifically intended the art collection to remain under Rebecca's sole control, explicitly stating that neither Harold nor Patricia should have decision-making authority over the pieces. "My mother knew," Rebecca said softly, reading the notes. "She knew exactly what grandmother wanted, and she tried to circumvent it anyway." James nodded grimly. "Dorothy was aware of certain family dynamics. She made her wishes very clear to me, and I documented them thoroughly. When Harold approached me about creating the trust documents, I reminded him of Dorothy's intentions. He assured me circumstances had changed and that you had agreed to the new arrangement." "I never agreed to anything," Rebecca stated firmly. "I understand that now," James replied, "which is why I'm providing these records to you. If your parents attempt any further legal maneuvers regarding the collection, these notes provide additional evidence of their actions contradicting Dorothy's explicit wishes." After James left, Sophia studied the documents with professional interest. "These are extremely helpful. The contemporaneous notes of the drafting attorney documenting the testator's intentions in detail, they significantly strengthen your position." But why would he risk his professional relationship with my parents this way?" Rebecca wondered. Sophia smiled slightly. "Even attorneys have lines they won't cross. James has represented your family for decades. He probably knew your grandmother, well respected her. Seeing her wishes deliberately subverted, using methods that border on criminal, may have finally pushed him past his ethical tipping point. But the documents James provided offered more than just legal protection. They gave Rebecca a connection to her grandmother she hadn't fully appreciated before. Dorothy Walsh had understood her son and daughter-in-law's controlling tendencies and had taken steps to protect Rebecca's autonomy even after her death. "She knew," Rebecca said that night as we reviewed the notes again at home. "All those times Mom and Dad tried to influence my decisions about the collection, Grandmother knew. They would do that. She was protecting me from beyond the grave." There was something powerfully affirming in this realization, that Rebecca's independence had been valued and defended by at least one member of her family all along. 2 days later, Rebecca received a text from Christopher. "Dad had a minor heart attack last night. He's stable now. Thought you should know." The news hit Rebecca hard. Despite everything that had happened, Harold was still her father, and the thought of his mortality shook her. "I should go to the hospital," she said immediately. I nodded, understanding the complex emotions at play. "Do you want me to come with you?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "I think I need to do this alone first. Establish that I can be present for him as his daughter without compromising the boundaries we've set." When she returned from the hospital 3 hours later, her expression was complicated. Concern mixed with a quiet certainty. "How is he?" I asked. "Stable. It was relatively minor, a warning sign rather than a major event. They're doing tests, probably recommend lifestyle changes." She sat beside me on the couch. Mom was there, of course. It was strange. "Strange how?" She was vulnerable," Rebecca explained. "Not performing or manipulating, just genuinely scared about Dad. When she saw me, she just broke down, hugged me and cried. No agenda, no subtle digs or guilt trips. Just a scared wife, grateful her daughter had come." The experience had clearly affected Rebecca deeply. It reminded me that underneath all the control and manipulation, they're just people. Flawed, sometimes harmful people, but still human. This recognition didn't erase what her parents had done or remove the need for boundaries, but it added dimension to Rebecca's understanding of them. They weren't cartoon villains, but complex individuals shaped by their own histories and fears, capable of both calculated manipulation and genuine vulnerability. As Harold recovered over the following weeks, a tentative new family dynamic began to emerge. The health scare had seemingly shifted something in his perspective, or at least in his approach to Rebecca. His trademark authoritarianism was tempered, his interactions marked by an uncharacteristic restraint. Patricia took longer to adapt to the new boundaries. There were occasional slips, questions about Rebecca's medication that crossed the line, suggestions about financial matters that tested the established limits. But when firmly reminded of the agreement, she would usually pull back rather than escalate as she once might have. "It's not perfect," Rebecca acknowledged during one of our evening walks around the neighborhood. "They haven't fundamentally changed who they are, but they're learning that if they want a relationship with me, it has to be on terms that respect my autonomy." The most significant test of this new arrangement came when Rebecca's lupus flared again, requiring a brief hospitalization. We informed her parents after she was already admitted and receiving treatment, deliberately avoiding the opportunity for them to insert themselves into the medical decisions. They visited once, bringing flowers but not opinions. Patricia visibly bit back questions about Rebecca's treatment plan, instead asking simply, "Is there anything you need from us?" The restraint seemed physically painful for her, but she maintained it. It was a small victory in the larger battle for Rebecca's independence, evidence that even Patricia Walsh could adapt when the alternative was losing her daughter entirely. As spring arrived in Portland, bringing cherry blossoms and renewed energy to the city, Rebecca began the process of cataloging her grandmother's art collection. Some pieces would be donated to the Portland Modern Art Museum, creating the Dorothy Walsh collection that her grandmother had always envisioned. Others would remain in our family to be enjoyed and eventually passed down to future generations. "I'm doing exactly what grandmother intended," Rebecca reflected, as we carefully unwrapped a particularly beautiful landscape painting. "Making my own decisions about these pieces, guided by my own judgment and values." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. In trying to seize control of the collection, Patricia and Harold had instead catalyzed the very outcome they had fought against. Rebecca's complete independence in managing her inheritance according to her own vision, not theirs. It wasn't the ending any of us had anticipated when I returned from London to find Rebecca sedated and manipulated. The path had been painful, the revelations shocking, the confrontations difficult. But as we hung the landscape painting in our Living room, a decision made without seeking anyone's approval or validation, the hard-won freedom felt worth every difficult moment. A year passed since that fateful night when I discovered Patricia tampering with Rebecca's documents. The seasons changed, Rebecca's health stabilized with a new treatment protocol, and our lives settled into a rhythm we'd created entirely on our own terms. One warm Sunday afternoon, as we prepared for a small gathering in our backyard, Rebecca paused while arranging flowers on the patio table. "It's strange," she said, looking around our transformed space. "I used to dread entertaining because I could hear my mother's voice in my head, criticizing every choice. Now I just enjoy it." I smiled, setting down a tray of drinks. "Freedom looks good on you." The healing hadn't happened overnight. There had been difficult moments, Patricia's occasional testing of boundaries, Harold's grudging adjustment to his diminished authority, extended family members confused by the new dynamic. But through it all, Rebecca had maintained her resolve, enforcing the boundaries with unwavering clarity. Our relationship with her parents had found a new equilibrium, not warm or intimate, but civil and structured. They visited occasionally, always by invitation only. They commented on Rebecca's health only when she volunteered information. They admired the artworks she'd chosen to keep without suggesting alternative arrangements. It wasn't perfect, but it was sustainable. Christopher and Natalie arrived first. For our gathering, their 2-year-old son, James, toddling energetically around our garden. "He's exhausting," Natalie laughed, accepting a glass of lemonade. "But wonderful." Rebecca watched the child with a mixture of joy and something else. Longing, perhaps. We'd been trying for a baby for several months, working closely with Dr. Patel to manage her lupus during pregnancy. So far, we'd had no success. "Any news?" Christopher asked quietly when James was distracted by a butterfly. Rebecca shook her head. "Not yet, but Dr. Patel says everything looks good. It's just a matter of timing." The doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of Harold and Patricia. Since his heart attack, Harold had softened slightly, his once commanding presence tempered by his brush with mortality. Patricia remained Patricia, controlled, measured, always impeccably presented, but she had learned to curb her more invasive tendencies, at least in our presence. "Rebecca, dear," she said, handing over a bouquet of carefully selected flowers. "The garden looks lovely." No critique, no suggestions for improvement, just a simple compliment. It was progress. Harold nodded at me with grudging respect. Over the months, he had come to accept, if not fully embrace, my role in Rebecca's life. The look in his eyes still occasionally betrayed his belief that she could have done better. But he kept such thoughts to himself now. As we gathered around the patio table, I observed the strange new family configuration we'd created. Not warm and unreservedly loving, but honest in a way it had never been before. The Walsh family facade of perfection had cracked, revealing the flawed humanity beneath, and somehow that made our interactions more authentic, if sometimes uncomfortable. Later, as Patricia helped Rebecca bring dessert from the kitchen, a task she performed with careful restraint, making no comments. About Rebecca's baking or kitchen organization, I overheard a fragment of their conversation. "I'll never understand why you needed such extreme measures," Patricia was saying. "The legal documents, the formal boundaries. Family shouldn't need contracts to interact." Rebecca's reply was gentle but firm. "They're not contracts, Mom. They're guardrails. And we needed them because you and Dad spent decades crossing lines most people instinctively respect." Patricia was silent for a moment. "We only wanted what was best for you." "I know," Rebecca replied. "But what's best for me was always for me to decide, not you. That's something you're still learning to accept." When they emerged with the dessert plates, Patricia's expression was thoughtful rather than defensive. Another small step in a journey neither of us had anticipated. 3 weeks after our gathering, Rebecca burst into my home office, her face glowing with excitement and apprehension. "I'm pregnant," she said simply, holding out the test result. The joy of that moment, pure, uncomplicated, shared just between us, felt like the culmination of everything we'd fought for. The right to make our own decisions, create our own family, chart our own course without manipulation or control. When we shared the news with her parents, their reaction was telling. Harold offered congratulations tinged with practical concerns about Rebecca's health during pregnancy. Patricia's eyes filled with tears, her hands instinctively reaching out before pulling back, remembering the boundaries, catching herself. "I'm very happy for you both," she said finally, maintaining composure. "If you need anything, only if you want it, of course, I'm here." The qualification, "only if you want it," represented perhaps the most significant change in Patricia's approach to her daughter. The recognition, however reluctant, that Rebecca's choices were hers alone to make. As Rebecca's pregnancy progressed, we prepared a nursery in the spare bedroom, painting the walls a soft green neither Patricia nor Harold had suggested. We selected furniture based on our preferences, created a birth plan with Dr. Patel's guidance, and made decisions large and small without seeking anyone's approval but our own. The day our daughter was born, a healthy 7-pound girl we named Eleanor after my grandmother, the balance of power in the Walsh family shifted permanently. As I watched Rebecca hold our child, exhausted but radiant, I realized we'd created something Patricia and Harold couldn't control, manipulate, or claim as an extension of themselves. Eleanor was ours, the product of our love, our choices, our hard-won independence, and while her grandparents would be part of her life, they would never shape her the way they had attempted to shape Rebecca. The cycle was broken. Standing by the hospital window as the Portland skyline twinkled in the dusk, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. A poisoned drink, a hidden camera, a desperate grab for control that had backfired spectacularly. Patricia's attempt to manipulate Rebecca's life had instead catalyzed her complete emancipation from decades of subtle control. When Harold and Patricia visited the next day, their behavior was subdued, almost reverent. They admired Eleanor without making suggestions about her care. They congratulated us without adding caveats or advice. They accepted the boundaries of their new role as grandparents who would love and support, but never control. As they prepared to leave, Patricia paused at the door of the hospital room. "She's beautiful," she said softly. "You did well." Then, with evident effort, she added, "Both of you." It wasn't a dramatic transformation or a perfect resolution. The Walsh family would never be a hallmark card of unconditional love and easy affection. But it was authentic now, built on truth rather than manipulation, on respect rather than control. And for Rebecca, for Eleanor, and for me, that hard-won authenticity was more valuable than any inheritance could ever be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.